Hello, welcome back to Little House on Laurel. Today we're making rye sourdough sandwich bread. This recipe combines hearty rye flour with all-purpose flour and active sourdough starter to make a rye bread that's not dense and is perfect for sandwiches. If you've ever wanted to give rye bread a try, but you thought it's more complicated than wheat bread, then I hope you'll try this recipe and see that you can make this too. Rye flour is ground from rye berries, which are grown across the world, especially in Europe and Russia. Rye is actually related to wheat and barley, and it's a cereal grain. It can be used to make almost anything that wheat is used for. Dark rye flour, like the one that I use to make this recipe, which I've found at local stores, it's actually the only one I could find locally. I'll link to it in the description box. This is considered whole grain rye flour. Now, just like wheat bread has wheat that is ground from whole wheat berries and still contains the bran, the germ, and the endosperm, dark rye flour is also ground straight from the berries. But you can find medium rye flour and light rye flour, and those are more like a traditional all-purpose flour where it's more refined and it contains only the endosperm. Those flours will give you a lighter bread, and you may not need to use as much all-purpose flour as in this recipe. But I did give this recipe a try using all rye flour along with my sourdough starter that's made with all-purpose wheat flour, and it was a very dense, inedible bread. So to lighten things up, kind of like with wheat bread, where usually if you're using whole grain wheat, then you use some all-purpose flour as well to lighten it up. That's what we are doing here in this recipe. Rye bread is actually considered to be a little bit healthier than wheat bread because it is loaded with fiber, B vitamins, iron, calcium, and zinc. It also contains less gluten than regular wheat bread, so it may be easier to digest for some people. You may be wondering how you can use your rye sourdough sandwich bread. I found that rye bread has a pretty bold flavor that goes well with other bold flavors. Smoked meats like pastrami or pepperoni or salami. Also hard cheeses like Swiss cheese, cheddar cheese, Gouda. A classic rye bread sandwich is the Reuben sandwich, which is made with thin slices of corned beef, Swiss cheese, sauerkraut, a little bit of Thousand Island dressing, and then it's toasted until the cheese is melted. It's really good. Those flavors really sound like they would not go well together, but with the rye bread, it just ties it all in. Rye bread is good for any kind of simple sandwich too. It's good for toast, and it also can be made into sourdough croutons. So if you need a recipe for that, check out my sourdough croutons recipe. For this recipe, you will need 1 3/4 to 2 cups all-purpose flour, 1 cup of rye flour, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 1 tablespoon of caraway seeds, 1 tablespoon of raw honey, 2 tablespoons of butter, 1 cup of active sourdough starter, and 2/3 cup of warm water. You'll also need an egg if you'd like to do an egg wash on top, and then additional caraway seeds to sprinkle on top of the egg wash. To get started making this recipe, we're going to feed our sourdough starter 4 to 10 hours before we plan on making the recipe. We want it to be nice and active and bubbly. The night before you want to bake your rye sourdough sandwich bread, you're going to mix together the ingredients in a stand mixer. You want to add the all-purpose flour last, and you don't want to add it all at once. You do this because you may need more or less flour depending on the hydration of your sourdough starter, which means how thick or runny it is. I'm going to add my 1 cup rye flour, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 1 tablespoon caraway seeds, 1 tablespoon honey, 2 tablespoons butter softened, 1 cup sourdough starter, and 2/3 cup warm water. I'm going to start adding the all-purpose flour, but I'm going to start with 1.5 cups and work up from there. You'll just want to gauge how much flour you need by watching the dough as it mixes with the dough hook And if it's still sticking to the bowl, then you do need to add more flour. You want to get to the point where the dough pulls away from the sides of the bowl. Once the dough has formed into a ball, and it's not sticking to the sides, then you're gonna stop kneading. Normally in a sourdough sandwich bread, such as my honey oat sourdough sandwich bread, you want to continue kneading it for 5 to 10 minutes so that it can develop elasticity and it'll be more likely to rise. But with rye bread, rye has less gluten than wheat, and so continuing to knead is not going to help it build a gluten structure. It's actually probably going to make it a harder dough and a harder bread. So we're gonna stop as soon as it's not sticking anymore to the bowl. The dough should be slightly sticky, but you should still be able to handle it. You want to form the dough into a tight ball and then place it in a greased bowl and then cover it with plastic wrap or something airtight because it's going to be sitting out on the counter all night and you don't want air to get to it and dry it out. I also cover it with a clean dish towel to make sure that it stays nice and warm so it'll rise well overnight. You'll ferment the dough overnight or for at least 8 to 10 hours until doubled in size. In the morning or once the dough has doubled in size, you're going to remove it from the bowl and shape it into a loaf, which basically is rolling it into a log. And then you can tuck the ends underneath to create a smooth loaf and then place it seam side down in a greased 9x5 bread pan and cover it with a dish towel. Now you're going to let it do a second ferment and rise again at room temperature until double. And this takes less time than the first rise. It should take about 2 to 5 hours. Once it's doubled again, you're going to beat an egg in a small bowl to make an egg wash. Brush the top of the loaf with the egg wash and then sprinkle with additional caraway seeds. And you can put as little or as much as you like. We're gonna bake this in a preheated 375-degree oven for 30 minutes or until golden brown on top. Remove it from the oven and then remove it from the bread pan using a spatula or a knife and then put it onto a baker's rack and let it cool completely before slicing. We're done making the rye sourdough sandwich bread. It turned out really nice. I probably could have let it rise just a little bit longer, but it's still going to be great. I did end up baking this loaf for 25 minutes instead of 30 because it was golden brown and it was ready. So just watch the oven between 25 and 30 minutes. I'm gonna slice this open. It's cooled completely. And you can see that beautiful loaf. So this is a great knife for cutting sourdough bread. It makes it way easier to cut bread, especially the artisan bread with the hard crust. Here's this beautiful bread. It smells great and it's gonna be wonderful for our Reuben sandwiches tonight for dinner. To make a Reuben sandwich, you're going to put butter on one side of each slice of bread, and then you're going to put Thousand Island dressing on each slice on the other side. You'll put 2 slices of Swiss cheese on top of the Thousand Island, and then we're going to use salami. You could use corned beef as well. And then on top of that, you're going to add some sauerkraut. Just make sure your sauerkraut is squeezed out so you don't get a runny sandwich. Then you'll top your sandwich with your remaining slice of bread with the dressing side down. So it'll be butter side up. And then it's ready to cook on a skillet over medium heat. You're gonna just cook until it's golden brown and the cheese is melted, which will be about 3 minutes for each side. Slice your sandwiches in half when they're ready, and you can serve with a pickle, chips, and we're gonna do some grapes on the side. So I hope you enjoyed this recipe for rye sourdough sandwich bread. I will have the printable recipe linked in the description box for you, as well as some other wonderful sourdough bread recipes. I would love if you left me a comment, gave me a like, or subscribe to my channel. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon.